Today we're going to take a look at the biggest competition for the Packers in the NFC North, between the Lions, the Bears, the Vikings, or maybe the biggest competition is ourselves. So stupid. Grossi Posse Packer Nation! Welcome to another episode of Packcast, a podcast where you're not a Packers fan, but it sure does help. I am your host, Tom freaking frackin' Walter Grossi, and today, as I said 10 seconds ago, we're going to take a look at the biggest competition in the NFC North facing the Green Bay Packers. We will be doing a NFC North prediction, who's going to finish first, second, third, fourth. Most likely next week, as we're going to go through every division in the NFL. That should be some fun times. But before we get to that, let's talk about the NFC North and what the Packers are facing. And so, obviously, what we're going to take a look at today is how the offense and defense of each team shaped up last year, as well as where they finished. But more importantly, the offseason changes that they made and kind of making some predictions, projections as to where they're going to be this year. And then we'll rank them from the least amount of competition to the most. So let's take a look at some stats from last year. So last year, obviously the Bears finishing first in the NFC North, followed by the Vikings, then the Packers, and then the Lions, even though the Lions swept us again. But we don't talk about that. Mason Crosby, I love you, but I still don't forgive you, you silver-haired fox. You broke my liver that game. Anyway, going to 2018, I want to take a look at a couple different categories for stats. The first one being taking a look at the offense. So the offensive points per game and seeing where each team wound up finishing. So the Bears actually finished ninth, even though known for their defense. Were putting points up on the board. They had the ninth most points per game total with 26.3, followed by the Packers at 23.5. The Vikings were 19th with 22.5, and then the Lions finishing 25th in the league with 20.3. I was going to break it down between passing and rushing, but at the end of the day, it really just comes down to the points per game that they're actually scoring. The Bears obviously finishing first. The Packers were just ahead of the Vikings, scoring the amount of points, and as Packer fans, we expect that number to be way, way up, considering we're usually scoring many, many more points per game. But the Bears were just a good all-around team last year. Obviously, as we'll talk about with their defense, they had the one of, if not the best defense in the entire league. And also, they had an offense that was nothing to shake your head at. I know there's a lot of jokes that are thrown about Mitch Trubisky and his inefficiency, but again, they got the job done. I think they rely a little bit more on their running game than they do on their passing game, but they have that luxury. So offensive points per game, it kind of fell almost similar to how the rankings actually were for the NFC North last year. Offensive yards per game, I threw this in there. So actually the number one team there was the Packers, finishing 12th with 369.1 yards per game. Followed by the Vikings, who were number 20th at 345 yards, 0.6 per game. The Bears were 21st, which was 343.9, and then the Lions were 24th, 327.3. So the Packers still putting up all the yards, but they weren't translating. We had red zone difficulties, obviously. And so the Bears were a little bit less ranked with the yards per game, but this is why you need to take a look at multiple different stat categories, because if I just told you points per game, you're like, wow, their yards per game must be really, really high. Not necessarily, because the Bears just get it done, whether it's through interceptions, whether it's through sacks, whether it's through fumble recoveries, and they have a short field to go, and they can just put points on the board that way without going all the way across the field. Then let's head over to the defense. So we took a look at their offense and saw that the Bears pretty much, obviously, points per game, they were leading. The Packers were yards per game, but I put a lot more emphasis, obviously, in the points per game because that's how you win the game. Defensive points per game allowed. So the Bears were obviously first in this category, only allowing 17.7 points per game last year. The Vikings were 9th with 21.3 points allowed. The Lions were 16th with 22.5, and the Packers were 22nd with 25. So the Packers defense, even though I had high hopes for the defense last year, obviously struggled. It was the first year with Mike Pettin, but the Bears again, was similar within the top 10 of their offense and now their defense coming up in number 1. They're not allowing a lot of points and they're scoring enough points to win these games. So the Bears obviously a great overall team just all around. And then the Vikings, again, their defense is still scary. Their defense was scary 2 years ago when they went to the NFC Championship game, and their offense kind of lagged behind, obviously, in the stat category last year. But their defense is nothing to shake your finger at. Then defensive yards per game allowed. The Bears were third in this category with 299.7. The Vikings were fourth with 309.7. The Lions were 10th with 335. And the Packers were all the way down at 18th with 354.4. So all three of the other teams in the NFC North finished in the top 10 of defensive yards allowed per game. And so that's something to, again, take note of as those defenses. The Packers are facing some pretty damn good defenses. Now, I'd like to think that our defense is also improving considering that we're having Mike Pettin for a second year. Obviously, we also drafted. We brought in some free agents. And so I'm hoping that the Packers are going to be able to finally get up into that, top 10 category there, which will also be a video as well. And then I wanted to take a look at one other thing, two other things actually. One in the stat category for sacks. So given up, the sacks, the Packers let up 53 sacks last year. That was the third most in the league. And then they tied 8th with actually making 44 sacks. So they were tied for 8th. So they weren't too bad. They were within the top 10 of actually sacking the opponent. The Bears and Vikings were actually tied at third. They were credited for 50 sacks apiece. And then the Lions were tied at 11th with 43 sacks last year. And so all that being said, we actually have some pretty damn good defenses in terms of sacks all around. Obviously, the Bears and Vikings tied at third, but the Packers and Lions are right there, basically all within the top 10. And then interceptions, the Bears were first with 27. You have the Vikings who were tied at 18th with 12. The Detroit Lions and the Packers were tied at 29th with 7. We also gave up the least amount of interceptions because Aaron Rodgers don't throw no interceptions, but we really are not making a whole lot of interceptions as well. And I think that is a knock on our secondary from last year, and obviously the Lions secondary, which has kind of been their weak point in the past few years. But the Bears, what you gather from this, if anything, and kind of wrapping up just like looking at these stats, is the Bears, their defense is crazy scary. The Vikings are right there within the top 10 in nearly every single category, and it's just the offense of the Vikings that needs to improve. And the Lions, while they are, doing okay with that defensive line, their defensive line is going to be super scary this year. They're kind of trailing a bit down with the Packers where they were last year. So what does that mean for this year? Obviously, the offseason for the Bears, they didn't really lose too much personnel. They lost Amos because he went to our team. Thank you. And they obviously lost Vic Fangio, but that team is still going to be scary. They drafted pretty well, even though they didn't have too many draft picks. The Vikings, they're going to be going into their second year with Kirk Cousins. They also drafted pretty well, finally getting an offensive line, getting also a backup for Kyle Rudolph, who they just extended. That team is not really going to be changing a whole lot. Adam Thielen obviously was tearing up the league last year. I think he's going to do well again. And then the Lions, maybe one of, if not the most improved team in the NFC North, in that they got obviously some big free agent pickup. Trey Flowers from the Patriots, Mike Daniels from us. And the Lions also drafted TJ Hawkinson, who I was super high on in the draft. He could block. He's a great passing threat, and so that offense might be taking a step as well. So if I had to rank these right now as to who poses the biggest threat to the Green Bay Packers, coming in at number 3 is going to be the Detroit Lions, in that their defensive front is going to be super scary. It's going to be upgraded. I think Matt Patricia in his second year is going to improve overall that Lions team. But at the same time, I think they need to prove it, because again, for years now, and I've said this many, many times on this show, the Lions should be a better team than last in the NFC North. But I think just because there is so much competition within that division, whether it be from the Packers when they were basically just winning every single year, or you have now the emergence of the Vikings and the Bears, there's a lot of really strong teams within that division, obviously within the NFC as a whole. And so I think that the Lions will definitely be competition for the Packers this year and could make a run even for the playoffs, considering how much their team has improved. And now it'll be more about okay, they had Matt Patricia for a year. Now let's start actually kind of smoothing out all the inconsistencies and getting back to winning some football. Number 2 is going to be the Minnesota Vikings. Should be no shock there. That defense is still really good and really scary. The offense, I think, while I am very happy to make 84 million insults against Kirk Cousins, see what I did there? Because you paid him $84 million. But in all honesty, I mean, it's his first year playing with a brand new team and a brand new system, and so this is his second year. I was just reading an article today about how Kyle Rudolph and Cousins are getting more on the same page, and so I think with hopefully Cook, well, for Vikings fans, hopefully Cook will have a better year because he came back from an injury last year, obviously didn't perform as well as the Vikings wanted him to, but with Thielen, with Diggs, that passing game should be pretty explosive, and they also have a great defense. And obviously shoring up that offensive line, they will definitely be a contender for the playoffs coming up. And then the number one unfortunate threat to the Green Bay Packers, imagine saying this 2 years ago, is the Chicago Bears. They really didn't have too much personnel change. You still have Khalil Mack. They don't have they don't have Fangio anymore, but again, I think the basis of that team is still there. Trubisky coming in again, and this is continuing to grow. Whether he's going to be able to take that step up and become, I don't even want to say elite quarterback, but this is going to sound like an insult, but like a great quarterback. I don't think he's a great quarterback right now. I think he benefits strongly from the system that is around him and also, of course, the defense. But that being said, if the Chicago Bears are able to start firing on all cylinders on their offensive side of the ball, like watch out. They're going to be scary, and they could not only be in line for the playoffs, but have a good chance of winning the NFC North again. Now, I do want to mention, I made a joke in the very beginning of this video that the Packers' biggest enemy could also be themselves, and I kind of mean that in a way. While obviously their biggest problems are the teams that are going to be lining up opposite them, the Packers, and I want to temper our expectations a little bit, and I made videos about why they could potentially not make the playoffs, is that we have a brand new head coach, we have a brand new offense, we have a brand new schemes coming in, we have brand new players coming in who are playing with each other for the first time. I'm happy that they kept Pettin and that this is his second year to work with the defense. I wouldn't be surprised if the defense is better than the offense. That seems to be also the narrative that's coming out of camp, in that the offense is constantly struggling. I think there is a little bit of a reliance, maybe too much, on Devontae Adams, in that Randall Cobb is now gone, Jordy Nelson is gone, Devontae is going to be the go-to guy. I'm not saying that's necessarily bad, but those wide receivers who struggled last year, they need to step up, which I think is going to be a great proving point for guys like Geronimo Allison and then some of the newer guys like MVS, EQ, etc. And so they're going to have every opportunity to. It's just, it might take more than a season for the Packers to gel and get good. And so I think this is going to be an interesting season because the Packers no longer have the benefit of having a weak division anymore, in that all three of these teams could potentially make the playoffs. Two of them most definitely should be in contention, and then I think a lot of people are sleeping on the Lions. And so it's going to be a fight. It's going to be a battle. I don't think there's any gimme games for the division this year. And it'll be most certainly interesting to watch. But let me know what you think down in the comments below, who the biggest competition for the Green Bay Packers is within our division. You can always find me at TomGrossiComedy.com or at TomGrossiComedy on all the social media seen down below. You can check out podcasts on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play Music, Spotify, YouTube, and all that great, wonderful stuff. And also, if you want to pick up this sweet shirt, where it's around for like another week or two, bonfire.com/packcast, so you can check that out. And also a big shout out and thank you to all the members over at patreon.com/TomGrossiComedy. It really helps and makes a difference. As we start doing more and more videos, we'll be getting more and more perks, so that is a big help to me. So thank you very much for those who have decided to support me. But thank you so much for watching. We'll be back tomorrow to talk about some fantasy stuff. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Tom Grossi. And as always, go Pack Go.